last presentation. Oh yeah, well,
Oh, yeah.
last presentation, I was having trouble and I had to break out my secret weapon, which is my little harmonica that I keep in my pocket. But not this time. Thank you all very much.
It is on YouTube if you guys want to catch his little presentation.
It's on YouTube, and my little dance too. Okay, well, welcome you all. Very glad to have you all join us for our Friends Group presentation. The Friends Group, if you're not aware, they do a lot for the park. They're a 501c3 nonprofit that exists only to support the park here at Estero Llano Grande State Park. So it's a great group of folks. If you're not a member yet, there's some sign-up sheets, some information about what the Friends Group has done in the past, and we're hoping to do a lot of things this year. So welcome. I'm not going to talk for very long. By the way, I'm Javier de Leon. I'm the park manager here at the park. And if you have any questions about the Friends Group, these folks over here are in the Friends Group, and as well as Barbara and Robert back there, Donna, many people here. Just ask somebody, are you a Friends member? If they say yes, you can talk to them. So again, thank you all very much. I'm very excited to have a great presenter with us this evening, Mr. Joe Vidales. And he's like, am I a great presenter? Yes, he is.
I'm in trouble now.
Yes. No, Mr. Joe Vidales, I met him several years ago. He's very knowledgeable about Wesco, and we were talking. He came over to the park, pursuing some of his history interests. We got to talking, and he has some history of this area that we're very interested in hearing. With both Mr. Vidales and I are very curious about many things. We're always excited to learn, but I never asked Joe for his bio. So I have no idea of your background. So if you want to tell us that, we'll start there. So everybody, Mr. Vidales.
In the beginning, why do you laugh? I'm a native of Wesco, born and raised. I have lived in a valley for most of my life. I lived in other places. I lived in Chicago for a year, Detroit for a year, San Antonio for 8 years, and I retired from Washington State teaching college psychology classes. And when I retired in 2010, there was no other solution other than move back home. And I'm living in the house that my father built in the 50s on the property that my grandfather bought in 1924. So I guess my roots are here. When I retired from work, I started volunteering at the Wesco Museum and started encountering questions that I didn't know the answer to, that we were not taught in high school or elementary school. So local history was foreign to me. So as I'm doing tours at the museum with Winter Texans, they ask me questions like, tell me about the Al Capone house. What? Tell me about all these things. And I pursued these interests and started developing talks about this, that, and the other. And the conversation about doing this presentation came up not too long ago, so I didn't have a lot of time to put this together. But I didn't know how much time I had. I thought I had 3 or 4 hours, but no. Read history. I started out with 1500 to 2000, so I cut it back a little bit. But it's not detailed. It's just I wanted to talk about. So we have the Estero Park, Estero Llano Grande Park. It's a beautiful place. But what was it before? What was it before that? What was it before that? How did this land, how did this environment have its origins in our history? So that's kind of where my talk goes. From the beginning, in the beginning, and that's to now. I ended at 2000 because the current history about who owned the property and the transitions from one owner to the other, I didn't have time to look into that, so you can fill that in.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in the beginning, this is New Spain. This whole chunk of Greenland is owned by Spain. We were known as New Spain, and it's half of the continent almost. And so one of the questions I'm asked by Winter Texas, I do talks at different parks here and there in different places, and the question is asked, there are a lot of people that speak Spanish here. I said, yeah, kind of. The origins of our countries, the first history or the first marker of Spanish in our area is 1519. So we've been talking Spanish for a while. And so this is the beginning. So about, if we start at 1519, in this territory that we have in South Texas and Texas, nothing happened for about 200 years. Spain didn't have much interest. There was nothing valuable for them here. Initially, they were looking for gold and silver. They didn't find anything, so they kind of went back to went to Mexico, went to Central America, South America, doing other things. And but about 1750 or so, this king of Spain was fearful that the French were going to start taking over their land. So from Louisiana coming into Texas, as far as Galveston, there was interventions by the French taking over some land. So the Spanish government said, we got to get more people down there. We got to inhabit the area. There's always been people here, but you wanted a larger presence in this area. So in about 1750, he sent down Jose Escandon to create new settlements in the area. And the new settlements went from Tampico in Mexico all the way to San Antonio. All the missions in San Antonio, the village of Reynosa, the village of Laredo, the village of, these are now enormous cities, but they started out as villages. And so that was the beginning of Spain increasing the inhabitants in the area, about 1750. So one way to entice people to come down here is, I'll give you some free land if you relocate. And if you petitioned, not anyone could petition for a land grant. You have to be part of aristocracy, you have to be part of military, have a good history with the king. You know, one of the whoop-de-doo people. I call them the whoop-de-doo people. So if you petition for a land grant and you were granted that land, you might get a small land grant, which would be about half a mile on the river and 15 miles north. Half a mile by 15. If you were really, really, really connected to the people that were anybody, you got 11 miles on the river by 15 miles. A land grant in Cameron County is 25 miles on the river by 15. One land grant. So these people were well connected, and so the land grants, I have a map up here, and I have a different map, and I have a different map. And I have this one for you to look at after the talk, which is that same, it's a land grants in Llano County. And there's a map like this for every county in the valley. So you can see the little strips here, and I'll show you a large one in a little bit. These are the half mile by 15, okay? And I'll show you the next picture. The large yellow Llano Grande, this was a Llano Grande land grant. This was 11 miles by 15. So every name that you see in the area, Llano Grande RV Park, Llano Grande Golf Course, Llano Grande tire repair, any Llano Grande comes from this origin of this land grant. That's the name of the land grant. So out of the land grant came Mercedes, Westaco, and part of Donna. So this was about 100,000 acres. So these land grant people were here, let's say 1790 or so, and again, they were cattle ranching. Before 1904, there was no economy that was based in agriculture in South Texas. It was cattle ranching, brush, cactus, mesquite, and a harsh environment. So that stayed in that way until 1904, when the railroad showed up. So rich people seem to know more than poor people. That's why I know very little. So people in the know are people with money. They were invested in the railroad coming down here. The railroad people started taking soil samples to Chicago and New York for analysis, and determined that there was anything could grow down here with water. And where's our water source? The Rio Grande. So people in the know around 1900 started buying land, and it was plentiful. These land grant folks, I mean, nobody had offered any money for this land at all, and they had to manage that whole chunk of land. So these folks are trying to buy land, and land was cheap initially. As an example, W. Stewart was a developer in this area, W. Stewart. He bought 30,000 acres from this land grant. He spent $90 an acre when he bought it. He sold it in 1917, 1918 to the developers of Weslaco for $700 an acre. So he bought it at 90 and sold it for $700. Made a couple of bucks there. So some of the developers in the valley are W. Stewart in the Mid-Valley, Launcey Hill in the Harlingen area, John Sherry in the Mission area, John McAllen, John Klosner in the San Juan and Alamo area, and Ben Yoakum. I left him for last because he was in this Mid-Valley, and he is responsible for the founding of Mercedes, and the development of the pumping station on the river. He's also influential because he was the one that convinced, he was the power broker. He was the one that convinced the King Ranch to allow the railroad to come through the King Ranch. If it hadn't been for his involvement with that, the King Ranch would not allow the railroad to come through because Mr. King, Captain King, had a big business transporting stuff along the river with the paddle boats. If the railroad came through, his boat business would suffer. A hurricane changed the course of the river, making boat travel difficult. So when that happened, he said, okay, railroad, you can come through. So the one that brokered that transition was Yoakum. Yoakum also convinced John Klosner from San Juan area to enter the St. Louis Agriculture World Fair in 1904. He said, John, take your sugarcane to the World's Fair in St. Louis. You'll do well. Klosner went up to St. Louis, won first place, gold medal in sugarcane. He beat out Cuba, he beat out Puerto Rico, he beat out all the Caribbean folks. And so that brought in more interest to South Texas because you could grow good sugarcane down here. And sugarcane was the first major crop in South Texas, before citrus and before cotton. So Ben Yoakum was a power broker. So the initial, and I shortened that their names get complicated because they use their mother's maiden name and their family name. And so I called this gentleman Mr. Bailly. He's actually, Posta de Bailly. He was the recipient of the Llano Grande land grant. But before he got accepted, he passed away. And his wife, who was married to the families that owned the La Feria land grant, which is just adjacent to us, she inherited the Llano Grande land grant, La Feria land grant. So she was a big hoop to do. So this land grant is about 11 miles on the river by 15 miles north. So in the Mid-Valley, when you're traveling around and you see mile 10 north, mile 6 west, do you know where those come from? What they designate?
From the river.
From Highway 83 to the river is 7 miles. You go 1 mile to Pike Boulevard, it's 8 mile 8. So I grew up knowing Pike, it wasn't Pike Boulevard, it was mile 8. And mile 9 is over where the water plant is. And so you're going north. 0 miles is the main street of Mercedes going west. So mile 2 is where the drive-in is. Mile 2 west, mile 3, mile 4. So, and the designation, I haven't found it specifically in writing, but the designation I think it has to do with surveying. If there's no roads, it's brush and cactus and mesquite. And you have to tell somebody, your property is over there. It goes 5 miles north, 2 miles west, and you'll get there. That's what I think these numbers came from. This doesn't happen in the McAllen area, it doesn't happen in the Harlingen area. It just had to do with this chunk of land here. So the land grant, the Llano Grande land grant was about 100,000, 110, 113,000 acres. So this land grant was divvied up with the heirs, and 3 sections of this 100,000 plus acres were sold ultimately. So again, we've seen a transition of the land was initially a land grant, now it's being transitioned into something else. One of the things I didn't know until I started doing some of the research when I retired was that there was a town, was going to be a town called Llano Grande, Texas. And Llano Grande again, I googled Llano Grande, Texas, and I get the RV park. And that's what comes up when you Google Llano Grande, Texas. But Llano Grande, Texas was the brainchild of J.P. Withers in 1910. So this town was going to be centered at the intersection of 1015 and 83, mile 83, right where the experiment station is. That was going to be the center of town. And he had big plans. He had not enough money, but had big plans. He envisioned the Casablanca plantations south of the lake, of Llano Grande Lake. That was part of his vision. This is beside the town. The town would be like, streets and alleys and whatnot. But it would be ranches and plantations this way. So his vision included the town in the 1015-83 intersection all the way to Progreso. So there were plantations and ranches and subdivisions. So the Estero Grande subdivision was north of the lake. Here we are. And those are the names that he gave to these chunks of land. So Mr. Winter's idea and his dreams didn't come to fruition, mainly because of the world change around him. Here's a sketch of the right where the intersection there are the two yellow markers. That's 1015 and 83. You see the railroad transitioning in a diagonal. That was his town site. So one of the problems that a lot of landowners and developers faced was that, again, in the early teens of the valley, there were very few roads and very poor roads. We have very poor trucks and cars and whatnot. So it was hard to get from here to there easily. So land buyers were hesitant to buy property more than 2 miles away from the railroad. They would sell properties within 2 mile range very quickly. But if this property was now 4.5 miles away from the railroad, it was harder to sell. It just got too difficult to bring your crops to market, which would be the railroad. Okay, so that was one of the things that he encountered. So his vision of bringing land all the way, or settlers all the way to Progreso, it was just too far to the railroad. Again, we didn't have 1015. We had something that looks like that out there. Between 1910 and 1920, Mexico was in the midst of a revolution. And there was overflow of violence from the Mexican side. There's violence in the valley between 1910 and 1920. Specifically 1913, 14, and 15 in the valley. There was spillover violence and what I think is erroneously called the bandit wars. Everybody refers to the bandit wars. This is where the Texas Rangers got a bad reputation in the valley in Texas, because we did have folks that crossed the river and they saw your property across the river and said, oh, she's got a new cow. Oh, she's got a new truck. Let's go over there and get it. Very easily to steal from the folks on this side of the river. But there were also folks from this side of the river going across to steal stuff, and steal from the cow that you had was stolen by your neighbor to the left, not the bandit from Mexico. But the Texas Rangers said, oh, if you look Mexican, you're guilty. So they were, a lot of Mexican folks, maybe as many as 1,000 or 1,500 folks, were unaccounted for because they were taken by the Texas Rangers. So all of this got the settlers, and I'm talking about the new arrivals from the Midwest down here. They were uncomfortable, so they were not buying land, and some were selling land and moving back. I did a talk at the RV park in Llano Grande last year on the bandit wars, and this lady came up to me afterwards and said, "This explains a lot of things in my family. I was born here in Mercedes, or wherever they were, and my sister was born in Kansas. And I guess she was born while they were here and safe and sound. When the bandit war started, they moved back to Kansas, and her sister was born in Kansas. Again, settlers were fleeing, selling their property here. It was unstable. So this guy was having trouble selling his land because of this, all these things that were going on. So about 1914, he was overdue payments on his mortgages. He had borrowed more than he could pay, and he sold back his land to the original developers that he bought the land from. They kind of repossessed it, I think. So again, we have a transition where we went from the Withers idea to have settlements from the intersection of 1015 all the way to Progresso, and now we're going to scratch that and start something else. So if he leaves the property in 1914, by 1916 they had new tenants. Because of the bandit wars, because of the revolution in Mexico, Pancho Villa running rampant all over the place. The U.S. government sent troops to the valley, National Guard troops. There were encampments in Mercedes, Weslaco, Mission, McAllen, from all over the U.S. And it was easy to get them down here because we had a railroad. It was easy to come down here. So in 1916, the campsite that these folks showed up to was, they used the building that was used by Withers. He had a large building called the Casablanca Hotel. And that hotel was now used as a military hospital. So again, transition of one property for different use by somebody else. So there were about, Camp Llano Grande, that was the name. 12,000, 15,000 soldiers. They came from Minnesota, I think I have it here. Minnesota, Nebraska, and Indiana. There's a story that somebody from Minnesota sent a postcard from here to his mom. Imagine folks from Minnesota showing up here in the summer in their wool outfits. And his note to mom is, there's a picture of the camp on the front, and the note to mom says, "Mom, it looks just like this, only hotter." So these folks were here for a year. There was some clearing already when they showed up, but with this many folks showing up, they had to clear more land. So if you look at outside and look at the brush, that's what they faced, and they had to clear to make encampments. So I mean, they had a hard time here. The Llano Grande Lake was used by the cavalry from the same encampment, because they were patrolling from the campsite, which is at the ag station, 1015 and 83, all the way to Progresso. There were watchtowers along the river to be on the lookout for the bandits and crossing the river. Kind of what we have today. We haven't changed much in all these years. So their mission down here was to guard the border, and if you can, catch Pancho Villa. But you know, Pancho Villa was too fast for them, so that didn't happen. But they did have some encounters with Mexican army and Mexican armies and bandits and things, but they didn't encounter a lot of combat. They used all their time down here for training, and trench warfare was their primary training. They were getting ready for World War I in France. So in 1917, World War I breaks out. These folks are taken from all the camps in the valley, were taken back to their original impostments and sent to France to fight World War I. So again, this property was available again. Okay, they vacated, it's available. The buildings that were there that they constructed were relocated or disassembled. Some went to Mercedes, some went to what was going to be Weslaco. And I'll show you some. This is the Casablanca Hotel being used by the military as a hospital. But all of these developers needed a place to house the potential buyers that they were trying to sell property to. And I'll show you a whole few slides on that. So the Casablanca Hotel was initially, the train stops right there, the Casablanca Hotel is right there. So what happened with the potential buyers is that the developers advertised in the Midwest newspapers, free trip to South Texas. Buy your dream farm, they have palm trees, we've got nice weather. So they bring in folks from Minnesota, Kansas, Ohio, Iowa. Sounds familiar? They bring them down. They're going to be here for 2-3 nights. They need to be housed and fed. So the housing is, they all have some sort of housing right next to the train station, or close by. If you look at the remnants of the San Juan Hotel, which is just about to fall apart now, But there was a train station right across the street from San Juan Hotel. And in Westaco, the Cortez Hotel was the uppity kind of hotel, but there was a better, more affordable, Motel 6 kind of hotel across the street from the train station. There was always a place for housing for these new arrivals. So excursion parties. This is what the name given to these folks that were brought in from the Midwest. They were brought in 2-3 days. The trip was paid for, or at a discount if they didn't buy properties. But if they bought property, it was a free trip down here. Some folks came down and bought right away. Some folks came down, went back, and they came back to buy. Some Army folks came back and bought. So there's a lot of folks that once it was known that the valley was here and changing and developing, there was interest in South Texas. So, again, these were the excursion parties. And I just talked about all of that. W. Stewart, he bought 30,000 acres that was originally from Llano Grande land grant, and he was again trying to sell it. So again, the same thing. This house faced the lake. Some pictures, all these pictures came from the Westaco Museum. And I don't know, I haven't found who exactly built it. I don't know if Withers built it or if Stewart built it. But we have looked on this property looking for remnants of this house or foundation, but don't know where exactly it was. Here's a picture of the house from across the lake. So we're looking at it from the south. So it's right on the edge of the waterfront. Kind of like a pontoon bridge going across. This is the dining hall for the Stewart house. And they had lots of folks that were brought in. So I'll pass this around and you can look at it afterwards. This is an excursion party.
Wow.
Wow, that's a
Wow. There's a lot of people.
Of course, we got Stewart staff as well. Here's the kitchen folks or the housekeeping folks or something. But there are a lot of folks. But these would be here 2-3 days and ship them out and bring a new bunch. And that's how they sold all their property. I call these folks the Winter Texan ancestors. Because they weren't here they were going to be here permanent. They were coming down here to be permanent. And so once they were here, they sent a postcard back to Minnesota and said, you'll never guess, it's December, I'm wearing my shorts, I'm bringing a margarita, and it's 90 degrees. Then your relatives came to visit, and they called it the migration. It's just a rotation. I mean, that's really how it started. But these were the original folks. This picture's from 1920. So here's W. Stewart. Founded in 1919, Westaco. And how did Westaco get its name?
From the development company.
Yes.
Something
Land
like
acquisition.
Stewart.
Land
Company.
Land acquisition.
And most of the towns in the valley are connected to the original developers. Sherryland, Don Sherry, McAllen, of course. Farr was Henry Farr. The only name that's always a mystery is Mercedes. There's a lot of mystery about that name. A lot of wives' tales, old wives' tales, or young wives' tales about Mercedes. It was named after the girlfriend of the dictator from Mexico. Well, no, that's not true. He didn't have one by that name. He had another, but so Mercedes is the queen of the valley. It's called the queen of the valley. We don't know where that name came from. La Feria was the name of the land grant, La Feria land grant. On Alamo, what's the
Hidalgo?
No,
Santa Ana.
Santa Ana. Santa Ana Refuge is Santa Ana land grant. Okay, and so the names are related to original land grants. So, what I did, I thought I put on here, but I didn't. I thought about it, but I didn't do it. So here's how these excursion parties went. You come down on the train. There are a bunch of volunteers to greet you. You get off the train. They say, "Who's your land developer?" Stewart. Okay, those 4 cars are Stewart's. Who's your land developer? We're Sherry. Oh, those over there. They take you to their properties, drive you around, take you to the house, and then bring you back to the train 2 or 3 days later. So that's, and I had pictures of that, but I don't know what it is. It's a mystery to me. So this current property came from the original land grant to the Withers ownership to the military ownership. W. Stewart had some chunk of land in here as well. And so over time, this park developed, starting in the year 2000, if I'm correct. Parcel of land from here, a lease of land from over there, a grant from here and there. And so just joining, people donating this, or the city of Westlaco donated some property, some owners of property donated some of their property for this establishment of this park. And so we transitioned from all of these different entities to create the park that we have today. And it's the journey that continues. Yeah. So the specifics of all the owners that happened between Stewart in 1919 or so to now is, I don't know the transition of all those owners of different properties. It's just, I didn't have time to research that. This park opened in 2006. That's my brief history. Very brief. I take some questions. There's a lot that I didn't.
So, all these people from the Midwest, European ancestry,
Yes.
own land here, but now it's mostly Hispanic background people who live here. So when did that change?
Well, you know, strangely enough, when I was growing up here, 80–90% of the population was Hispanic. I mean, it seems like it's always been that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the forefront have been the European ancestry folks. Of course, if I say I'm not European ancestry, I'm lying, because I have Spanish ancestry, I have other French ancestry and whatnot. But who's in charge? Who makes the headlines? Who makes? So if the Hispanic population doesn't get the headlines because they're not mayors or they're not governors or they're not, you say, well, what happened to it? Now, when I was growing up and I come back to visit, a transition I saw was that the graduating class of Westlaco High School was all white. The honor graduates were all white. The honor graduates. And I thought, well, I was kind of smart. And some of my classmates were kind of smart. I mean, a lot of PhDs in a bunch, a lot of high degrees and whatnot. But we just didn't make it. Growing up also, again, addressing the question about who's in charge. Something that came to mind many years after high school. So, Susie is running for head cheerleader and homecoming queen. And so Maria is running for head cheerleader and homecoming queen. Well, Susie and Glenda and I don't know, other names, always won. Karen always won. And I'm thinking, who's counting the votes? I mean, who counted the votes? Because the schools were segregated until 1971.
Wow.
71, they started.
Oh, 71?
Yes, ma'am.
So Spanish speaking, English speaking, separate.
I mean, I went to school, when I went to school, I was bilingual. I could read and write in 2 languages, okay, in 1st grade. Because that was my father's doing. He said, you're not going to survive, we don't do this. Okay, so the first elementary school in Westlaco, on the north side of town. Westlaco, when it was founded by Ed Couch, the founder of Westlaco, not the Ed Couch of town, He named after that after himself. But he founded this town. They created an ordinance, a city ordinance that said the railroad track will divide the town in two. North is for Mexicans and industry, and south is for white folks. And north folks do not be shopping over here after dark. There's a curfew. Okay.
Mercedes was about the same.
All the towns in the valley had that same designation. When I started working at the McAllen Museum, I started asking these questions and said, oh, I don't know about segregation. Well, we had Main Street. Main Street McAllen is very prosperous and very well to do. 2 streets down, you had Mexican Main. So there was that separation. Okay. After the Civil Rights Act in the 60s, Texas did not abide by anything that the Civil Rights Act did because we're Texas. We don't have to. Did you know that about Texans? It's something I'm proud of. But the U.S. government said they filed suit against the Texas Education Agency. You will abide by the Civil Rights Act, or you will lose federal funding. The next year, the city was buzzing. So if you were in the first elementary school in the north side of town was called the Mexican school. And it was a black school as well. And on the north-south side of town was St. Stephen F. Austin Elementary School. And they were just kept separate. And it was just separate.
Not equal.
And not equal, true. So hearing an oral history, a tape of an oral history from the early settlers, the questions asked, so if you have a elementary school on the Mexican side, elementary school on the white side, you have a high school and a junior high on the white side, why don't you have a high school and a junior high on the south side, on the north side with the Mexicans? You don't need a high school education to work in the fields. And that was the answer. So that was the mentality. When the year before, a few months before they started the busing, the school district on the front page of the Wesco News did a self-exploration, that we need to change our attitude. We need to make changes. We need to stop treating these folks as second-class citizens. And so the transition I've seen from all white undergraduates, now they're not all white. They're mostly Hispanic. The population is mostly Hispanic, so you have to have that. Again, the first Hispanic mayor in Wesco was 1972. So 71 was a big change in the valley.
So following that line of thinking, was there a point that you remember where, well, first of all, was there a lot of crossing the border, not bandits, but for trade or for
sure.
business? And was there a point where the white Spanish person over here or the educated fell in love with the Mexican?
Yes.
That's forbidden.
At what point did that start happening though?
I mean, when Spain conquered the Aztecs, a good-looking Spaniard sees a good-looking Aztec woman. He didn't say, "Oh, I'm not going to touch her." He said, "Come on, honey, let's go on a date."
That's one way to say it.
Being conservative here, okay? But they had a lot to lose. The Spanish had a lot to lose. If you were born in Spain and married somebody from Spain, you were at this level. If you were born in Spain and married somebody from Spain, here in the New World, you were 1 notch below. If you were from Spain and married a Spanish woman who was born here, still Spanish but not Indian, you were 1 notch below. And it went on and on again. So my brother was dating, he was a star athlete, my youngest brother was dating a star athlete, white girl. Jerry was her name. And they snuck around, they went to the drive-in, and they did all sorts of things that high school kids do. I don't know what that is, and I forgot. But Jerry's parents found out. And this is 1974. Jerry, you will drop art. If you don't, we don't pay for your college, and you don't get a car at graduation. Art was dropped like a hot potato. And it's just the way it was. Sure. I mean, I don't know where to go with that. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about that, excuse me, first railroad line. Obviously it terminated here in Westlake, is that correct?
The what?
The railroad line. The
No, it
first one.
terminated in Mission area.
Oh, over Mission,
Yeah,
okay. And started out of Houston or?
Houston, Corpus, down to Harlingen, down to Brownsville. And from Harlingen, it makes a U-turn west.
Okay.
No fire.
Do you know, was it one of the major railroads that built it, or was it a local line, or?
The line was the St. Louis, Frisco, it was called the Frisco line. St. Louis to San Francisco originally, the intent was St. Louis to San Francisco, but it didn't go west, it went south to New Orleans. And Missouri Pacific took it over, and then, what's the other one? Southern Pacific was also one of the, it transitioned with different owners. I don't know, Missouri, I think owns it now, Missouri Pacific owns it now.
Union Pacific. And then there's a Rio Valley switching company, but they're on the St. Louis.
It's a short line,
Yeah.
Colorado, yeah. Yeah, I remember the Frisco.
That was Mr. Yoakum's railroad line.
I don't want to get too far off the tangent here, but I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife part-time, and there's a place in, it's just near La Bruya, that up on a hill, one of the properties that we have up there has a big swimming pool made from early 1900s, and they said it was for training horses for swimming across rivers. And this thing is massive. I've got some pictures of it. I just took them the other day. And I was just wondering if you knew anything about that. It's actually on top of a hill, and I have no idea at that time how they would have got the water even up there.
My history knowledge, north or west of Mission is zero.
Okay, because yeah, that's what I was wondering. That's why I didn't want to get too far off the
Yeah.
tangent. But
But
I'll show you some pictures.
Something to look into.
Yeah, I'll show you some pictures.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain the Llano Lake? Is where is that? Or
Well, when I was growing up, what did we didn't call it Llano Grande Lake, we called it Stink Lake. And it was wide enough, deep enough that you could water ski. There was boats and people water skiing. My classmates, of course, I didn't have skis, I didn't have a boat, I lived on the wrong side of town. But my classmates that did, I mean, they have great knowledge of that waterway, which is much wider than it is now. But over time, it has filled in, and stuff has grown. But it was much wider, like the picture you saw from the lakefront.
Yeah.
I first questioned, there can't be a lake there. I never knew it as a lake, but it was not like it is today. It's just on the south side of.
The levee. It's between the levees.
Yeah.
And the bridge going to Progreso. That's what the lake is. Yeah.
So
Yes, sir.
Go ahead, please. The floodway, would that have modified it when they started modifying the IVWC floodway or the Arroyo Colorado for flood control? The levees
The,
up
yeah,
there, yeah.
the levees of the floodway.
The levees, not the floodway. The levees.
Yeah, the levee started in the late 20s or late 30s because flooding from the river was just disastrous for the valley for agriculture. And so that really curtailed that was before Falcon Dam was built. Falcon Dam came in 53.
Was the Arroyo Colorado always?
It's always been there. Yeah, I mean it's changed over time as far as size and depth and width and all that. But I think it's always been there. Yes, sir.
Yes, you kind of glossed over at the end there about the setting up of the park. I'd like to hear how it was conceived and who did it, and maybe Jason was more about it.
Sure, yeah. Looking for my laptop. Can I connect my laptop real quick?
Sure.
So, okay. And I'm not going to take away from Mr. Vidales too much. But on my laptop, I have a map of the park. So basically, if you can think of coming from 1015, right? There's 12 acres. That was purchased from the Methodist Church in 2012. So that's 12 acres of the park. Next to that is what we call a tropical area now. That was Lakeview RV Park for, about 50 years or so. So where the where the tropical area is, that was populated by many people. Maybe 200 homes when we're in the Llano Grande RV park. And then here, where we're sitting, and these ponds here was crop fields. It was just agricultural fields for many, many years. So this was just, thank you. This was just soil. I think the last crop was in 2000, and that was sorghum. That's what I've been told. Uh-oh. Sorry. Should have put the limbo rock on my So that was just soil. And then if we're going on the other side where Alligator Lake is, that was that's Texas Parks and Wildlife property. And then once you get to the power lines, that is U.S. Fish and Wildlife property. So we have a 50-year lease from the power lines to Llano Grande RV. That's on a 50-year lease from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So it's called the Adams Tract. If you're looking at maps, I'm telling you the U.S. Fish and Wildlife guy. So like Mr. Vidales said, it's a pathway. Oh, I forgot to say, Green Jay Trail, which is right near the entrance of the park, that was purchased outright from the city of Westaco, because the city of Westaco owned that. And we were just given some, well not given, we just found some pictures of, I guess I don't need my map, I just described it in the word picture. We just found some pictures over in the Methodist Church camp, in their old office. Our park host found some photos from the 50s, and it showed the thicket and Green Jay Trail intact back in the 50s. So when people walk through the park, I always tell them, if you wanted to see pristine habitat, never been grazed, at least not until the 50s. In the 50s it looked perfect. Never been grazed, never been cleared for agriculture. Walk through the Green Jay Trail and you'll see trees intertangled with each other and lots of plants that are around there. In the Methodist thicket, or camp thicket, where the public, it's close to the public unless you rent the overnight facilities over there. But we do have a population of federally endangered plant that lives there. And for many years it was one of 2 colonies known in the world, I guess, for that plant. For a few years.
Did
So
the Methodist Church build the?
Yes, the Methodist Church built the all the buildings over there because they own that. And if you, that's for another presentation. The Methodist Church was built on weekends by anybody that knew stuff. So there's a lot of shortcuts over there that we get to see. But that's a history of the park. Around 2000, some of it was purchased, some of it was leased. Some of it we already owned as a wildlife management area. This gentleman, Mr. Wagaman, who white-winged dove hunting was really promoted by him for many, many years, and that's why he's known as Mr. White-winged Dove. He lived on the property for some years behind Alligator Lake. He had his house out here for a few years back in the 70s. So yeah, it's a patchwork like Mr. Vidales described. So
was it his idea to do the park, or who conceived it?
Oh, that's another good question. Yes. So, there's a gentleman out of Houston. I can think of his name, but I can't remember him. But there was an idea to have a World Birding Center, one World Birding Center site, which is a world-class birding center, nature center, basically. People, different cities in the Rio Grande Valley compete to have their World Birding Center in their city. Westaco won that competition, so the people that put that kind of presentation or packet together for the legislators up in Austin, those were local folks, some folks from the Chamber of Commerce, a local high school teacher. Oh my God, I can't remember his name. Hold on, I can't go on until I remember it. Lehman. No, Mr. Lehman? No.
Richard Lehman.
Lehman, yes. Mr. Richard, Mr. Lehman.
He's Mercedes.
Yes.
Mercedes.
Yes, he taught Mercedes. So Richard Lehman and a couple other folks, they really kind of encouraged Westaco to invest in having a birding center. So the city put up a whole bunch of money. Texas Parks and Wildlife put a whole bunch of money. And then there's some controversy about the World Birding Center sites that happened. I won't go into that because I'm on video, but it went from one World Birding Center site to 9, and the headquarters ended up being at Benson. But that's how this site kind of came to be. And now, because, oh darn, can't open my thing. Now, because state parks is celebrating 100 years, it's kind of neat how these parks came to be very quickly. There's a lot of political weight, I guess, behind establishing these parks. I know there's some parks in Texas, like Chenati Mountains over there in Dallas. They've been wanting to open their park for 14, 15 years. This park was established in 6, so it was very quick work, and we're glad for it. So that's how this park came to be. So yeah. And Weslaco had a lot to do with it. The city of Weslaco, there's a lot of support from the city, lots of political support. And that's how it came to be. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, if I might, just to follow up, so once the land was all acquired and the boundaries determined, like, and you said some of this was former cropland, some of this was former residences, some of this, so I assume the land had to be worked to clear to get it back to more of a park kind of setting, which probably involved a lot of labor.
Yes. So let me show you a before picture. So where we're standing, this was taken in 2002. This is this area right here. So Ducks Unlimited came by, worked with Texas Parks and Wildlife. Ducks Unlimited works on habitat projects for duck hunting and increasing habitat for waterfowl. So they worked with Parks and Wildlife on the design for some of these ponds. And this is what it looks like today. So along with that, when a park is built and designed, there's a lot of thought that goes into that. The park planners up in Austin, when you walk into the park, of course, it's kind of weird to say it now because it's at night. But next time you walk into the park towards the headquarters, you come down the brick walkway and then you take a right and then you walk down to the headquarters. And that was designed when you're walking down to the deck, the wetlands kind of open up in front of you, and that's by design. The trails, you know, some of the trails kind of existed before, but there's a trail around this pond, there's a trail around Dowager. You know, the trails, how they meander in that part of the park is all by design and stuff. So there's folks that kind of work on that. I will mention part of that, you know, how it went from Lakeview RV Park to Texas State Park. There's a lot of stories back from that. From those couple years, you know, there's people living in Lakeview RV Park, and now there aren't. That was a lot of going back and forth between the Lakeview RV owners, City of Weslaco, and Texas Parks and Wildlife, and that's a story for another day. But yes, but it's a park now.
So do you still dig up relics like tires or trash left behind?
Oh man, good question. Yes. So let me see that. Okay. So here's a map of the park. So to summarize, this is Camp Thicket, 12 acres. Here and Green Jay Trail is probably the best example of what, you know, old kind of riparian habitat. Maybe, you know, much of this was kind of connected to this a long time ago. Here's Llano Grande Lake that we're talking about. And what should we call it? I forgot your question. Sorry.
Oh, just like, does that mean that you're still finding maybe artifacts from the previous human habitation of this area?
So, unfortunately, yes. Many, many years ago, here's the power line road. So for many years, whether it was people that lived here or people from somewhere else, but there was a huge dump way over here. And in the office, we have a lot of old glass bottles from from the 1920s to the 50s. So nothing within Parks and Wildlife, there's natural resources and cultural resources. The litter that was found here isn't considered cultural resource because it's not old enough, basically. But a couple years ago, with some volunteers, we cleaned up a lot of that. Just a lot of trash. Most of it was from the 70s, basically. some horse bones over the years, some horse leg bones just out there. We just never have sent them in to get tested to see how old they are. But that's the most interesting. There is one thing that I was telling Mr. Vidales about. Right here, right behind the headquarters, City of Weslaco was digging up. They were doing a big hole to put in a check valve. It's a plumbing thing. I won't get into it because y'all are about to eat dinner, I'm sure. But anyways, a sewer problem. They dug about 2 feet whenever there's digging, because ground disturbance is very important for Parks and Wildlife. Whatever they're digging, there has to be somebody trained with cultural resources to recognize artifacts. And one of our maintenance guys that had just taken the training, they dug up a cooking implement about this big, and it was not made in a machine, it was made by a smith. And that lives in our archaeology lab up in Austin. But that is the one artifact that we have from the park. Archaeology is not talked about too much because it's kind of sensitive in some places, but here in the valley there aren't a lot of artifacts, basically because the work hasn't been done, and I'm trying to work with archaeology folks to do some tests around the park. But there's one artifact for us. For Saca de la Palma in Brownsville, there's one artifact, and it's a shell about this big that's made into a spoon, and it's not, it wasn't made recently, and it's a very old, it was very, very well worn. But yeah, unfortunately that's the only thing that we have. So, yes.
On that bottom loop, there's a school bus and on Old Foundation.
Yes.
What is that?
So, we'll compare notes. From what I've heard, the people that used to live here, the Ballards, they're the ones that owned the RV park. From what I've heard, one of the sons, that was their party place. So that old building was I think they ran a bar out of there or something. But when people used to fish in that lake, either it was people bought bait or they partied there, and I think that's where that school bus came from. Is that what you know?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm trying to think about water and how water is shared and you get portions. If you go far back, when this was being considered of making it a park, or even when the thicket was the Methodist Church, to fill the ponds, did you have to work with all the people involved to figure out how you would keep water and do what you do now?
So I think, going back to this picture, you can see, it's not in here, but since this was an ag field, all the irrigation lines were already here. So I think the cement standpipe at the entrance to the park, I think I asked the canal folks like how old that is, and they said 1920 something or 1930. So all the infrastructure to put water into the fields was already here. So when the park was created, we basically incorporated those pipes and all that stuff into the pond management stuff.
And back when it was agriculture and was everyone just taking water from the lake?
From the river.
From the river?
Yeah, all the water came from the river. Yeah, even the reservoir that exists now, Delta Lake, north of Elsa, that's a reservoir created by the irrigation district as a reservoir. The two lakes in Progreso, Lion Lake, and originally they were resacas, but they're now managed by the irrigation districts. They keep them filled with water so that they can be a reservoir for their projects.
Was there any ever information about people arguing about water?
There's always been arguments about water. Yeah. One of the presentations I do is a history of irrigation in the valley, and a piece of that information that just staggers me is that in the valley there's over 2,000 miles of irrigation pipes and canals.
Wow.
Within the 23 irrigation districts that exist between Brownsville and Mission and Raymondville. That's a lot of pipes running all over the place.
When was that built?
As soon as they started clearing the land, like in this area, Llano Grande, Mercedes, 1906 was the clearing of the land. 1906 and the building of the pumping station on the river. That's 1906. So they're gonna clear the land, sell the land with irrigation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when they were started selling properties, they were selling them with irrigation. At the time, all the water systems were above ground. So they lost a lot of water to evaporation and seepage. Then they started doing concreting on the canals, and then they put them underground. If you see these standpipes, these cement standpipes, just go when the field is clear. You see that they all in the line. All the standpipes are in the line. There's a pipe underneath that's carrying the water. I learned that when I was doing that.
Well, I think that's a good point to probably invite Mr. Vidales back, because I'd like to learn all that
Yes.
stuff. It is, yeah. So we'll see y'all next week. No, no, it's 8 o'clock. I don't want to. Yes, thank you. I was going to say it's 8 o'clock. I don't want to keep y'all here too long. But we'll be here for about 10-15 minutes if you all have any other questions. But thank you all so much. And if you're not a member of the Friends Group yet, please consider it. And any Friends Group questions, they'll be around here for you. Y'all will be around here too. Thank you all.